Welcome to 30 Millennium Institute podcast when we discuss the topics of the contemporary social changes and their consequences. In the latest episode, we'll explore the challenges faced by young men and women in the forming stable relationships and marriages, with particular attention to the impact of the sexual revolution and contemporary media and broader social cultural shifts. My name is Jan Palka and my guest is Professor Mary Eberstadt, a senior research fellow at the Faith and Reason Institute in Washington, D.C., author of well-known books about the changing society such as Adam and Eve After the Pill, Paradoxes of the Sexual Revolution, or Primal Screams, How the Sexual Revolution Created Identity Politics. Professor, thank you for coming to our podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here in Krakow.
Thank you, Jan. It's a great pleasure to be back.
Professor, in our previous episodes, my colleague Maria Eberstadt spoke with you about the key themes of the sexual revolution and its legacy. Today, I would like to return to that topic, focusing on something you mentioned in your recent lecture, the effects of the sexual revolution on the relationships among young men and women. This question often comes up in conversation between students and professors, as well as among young Catholics during retreats and community events. It touches not only on dating and marriage, but also on identity, human longing, and the connection between sexual freedom and lasting happiness. In your view, what are the most significant cultural, psychological, or spiritual factors that make it difficult for young Catholic men and women today to form lasting relationships and pursue marriage? What do you see as the root causes of this growing disconnect?
Well, Jan, I would like to talk about two different factors here. And the first is the sexual revolution itself, which begins in the early 1960s with the legalization of the birth control pill, that is, of chemical contraception that is very reliable the great majority of the time. And the embrace of this substance quickly changed the world and continues to change it, because very soon there will be very few people alive. There will be very few people alive who even remember life before the sexual revolution began. And that's a remarkable fact. And it's also a reason why we have to pay attention to this. So the sexual revolution was said by many to be a liberation. People believed that if women were not tied down by their fertility, the world would end up a better place. Paradoxically, this is not what has happened. And part of the reason it hasn't happened is that the sexual revolution seemed to introduce a kind of consumerism into romance that had not been there before or had not been there on that scale. Now, what do I mean by consumerism in romance? I mean that in a world where a great many women are potentially sexually available without consequence, this was the promise of the revolution, the incentive to settle down with any one of them was greatly diminished for many men. And this introduced the idea, perhaps, that we could shop for people as we can shop for consumer goods. And with that idea comes another one, which is that the supply is somehow potentially infinite, or anyway, vast. So the revolution itself, I believe, introduces uncertainty from the very beginning and takes away the trust that people used to have in the pre-revolutionary world, or that they tried to have in the pre-revolutionary world. The second thing I'd like to talk about in this regard is, of course, what is new out there, and that is social media. It's not new to you and to your generation. You are digital natives. But to someone born before the use of social media, it is obvious how this interferes with romance and with finding relationships. First of all, for young women, and this has been well studied, the constant attention to social media and to imagery seems to be destroying confidence on the part of young women, that they are beautiful, that they are desirable, that they are marriage material even. The constant bombardment of images of people who look perfect and people who look always happy suggests to young women especially that there's something wrong with them. Now, I would tie this back to the sexual revolution itself, which treats the idea of female fertility as if it is a problem. Since the 1960s, women have been getting the message that something essential about them is a problem. First, because the idea of contraception establishes this view, and second, because social media reinforces it. And so I can really empathize with young women who find it hard to connect with young men because their confidence has been undermined. Now, what about the young men? I think the use of social media by young men is also problematic for romance for two reasons. One, of course, because many are drawn to pornography and to obscenity on the internet. This is well documented, and I don't feel embarrassed talking about it because we all know that it's out there. That is a temptation that needs resisting for the sake of long-term love. But I'm happy to report that there are ways of resisting it now. There is software that didn't used to exist. There are websites that didn't used to exist to help diminish that temptation. There are things you can put on your devices now that did not used to exist to protect your eyes from this kind of problem. So that's one way in which social media is problematic for young men. The other way is that I think it has an effect on male agency, and let me explain what I mean by that. When I talk to young women, I hear very often that they're waiting for a young man to make the first move, right? To show some initiative, yes. To say, let's go out for coffee, or something minor like that. And I feel as if many young men are afraid to take that step. So the question is, where does that fear come from? And I'm open to a conversation about this because I'm curious.
That's what I wanted to refer to, because of course we can agree that the sexual revolution has changed the current culture around us. And I would like to touch a related but distinct issue. What, in your opinion, are the factors contributing to the increasing delay among men in making decisions about starting a family? Are we, just like you said before, unprepared for the marriage? Maybe we are too afraid to ask the girls. And that's my first question. And how does the pervasive influence of a pop culture, social media, and the sexualization of everyday life shape their attitudes towards relationships, fatherhood, and emotional responsibility? Could the lack of healthy representation of masculinity, femininity, motherhood, and the fatherhood in popular culture contribute to fear of commitment?
Yes, absolutely. Changes in the Western family contribute to fear of commitment. Fewer and fewer young people have examples before them of large, robust, extended families, for example, because all of that has changed, again, since the 1960s, which led to smaller families, broken families in some cases, families where there just aren't as many available human beings to connect with. Now, why does this matter? I think it matters because it's part of the hesitancy of young men that they know less about other people than they used to. This is true for young women too, but I believe, being something of a sexist, that young women have an advantage in these matters because they are more intuitive. They are more emotionally attuned and communicative. Whereas for young men, I think for those without a father, for those without a strong family life at home or a strong life in a religious community, Of course, they are hesitant to put themselves out there in the world. So I guess what I'm saying, Jan, is that rather than blame the young men in this situation, I think it would help us and them to understand the structural factors that have changed their lives and made their lives very different from, say, their grandparents. Because I don't think any of this is insurmountable. I think we can be hopeful about all of it. But first, we have to understand what young people today are up against, what makes them unique.
So aren't young women often encouraged by surrounding culture to focus mostly on careers and independence? Do you think that message might be one cause of lower birth rates and later life unhappiness for women who eventually want a family?
Yes, absolutely. The emphasis on education first for young women is definitely having an effect on the ages at which people get married and then how many children they go on to have. And part of that pressure, again, ties back to the revolution, because in a world in which, say, people have 8 children at home, the pressure on performance for any given child is different, right? That's just common sense. Whereas if you are a parent of one young woman or 2 children, the pressure, whether it's self-perceived or social, on them to perform, including educationally, is commensurately higher. Now, I am not making an argument against female education, obviously. Rather, obviously, I believe that women, being the intellectual equals of men, have every right to education. What we need to get across, though, is that they are fundamentally different in the number of years that they can bear children. And I think there's been a real denial about this in the popular culture and in university culture as well, which tends to treat men and women as interchangeable units. They're not. They are biologically not.
Like we can agree that being educated and independent is important, but we also know that after the age of 30, 35 especially, the probability of getting pregnant decreases a lot. Do you think some people forget biology, like fertility windows, especially when advising young women about their future life choices?
Yes, and they forget it for a reason, which is that the culture teaches them that their fertility is a problem in the first place. This is what it means to live in a contraceptive world. Young women are told that something beautiful about them, their fertility, their ability to participate in creation at the highest level, is somehow a problem. And this is why I think many have an unrealistic idea about the differences between men and women when it comes to fertility. Again, it is not the fault of the young women. They have been taught falsehoods by the society around them, and one of those falsehoods is that their fertility is something other than a beautiful thing. That's what we need to restore, Jan. We need to restore a sense on the part of men and women that participating in creation is a beautiful thing in the cosmos, perhaps the highest human attainment of all for many people.
So now let's talk about men. So do you think, is there one reason why men don't want to marry? It's a cultural reason or something else?
It's a great question, and a lot of people are wondering about it. I assume that part of the reason is the same as it is for women, which is that people are sometimes pressured by their families, right? Men absorb the message as well. Get your education first, get your job first, and then think about a family. The difference is that men have the ability to do that into their 40s and 50s, and women do not. So I feel for the young men as well, because I think they are subjected to social forces that were not this intense before. For example, the idea that being a husband and a father is a wonderful thing, and that men should get points as men for that. This idea is in remission. This is not something our society says. Our society does not validate young men and women who choose to, say, get married early or have a family of size. And I think it will be a great day when we have some kind of restoration of the notion that the sacrifice of marriage and family is a beautiful thing and that we should appreciate the people who do it.
We see how Hollywood depicts a father, a man. He's lazy, he's sitting on the couch, he doesn't care about the family. What can we do about it?
There's a lot of talk in the United States about how much we need alternative creative media, right? New movies, new series, new shows. And what's interesting is that with the explosion of digital media, we actually have a chance to create some of this new kind of storytelling. In fact, I know people who are doing this in radio right now, for example. Relevant radio in the United States is increasingly telling stories from a Catholic point of view and reaching a wide audience by doing it. There's a lot more creative work that can be done in that regard, and one of the things that makes me hopeful is that we now have the technology to provide alternative media. Hollywood will not be Hollywood forever, and that's a good thing.
Now I'd like you to ask about something slightly different. This question might be a little longer. What do you think about the social media's role in shaping men and women dating expectations? Studies like the 2010 OK Cupid data report and 2018 online dating analysis show that women get the most attention from men between ages 18 to 25 and then interest declines. Could receiving so much attention during those peak years make some women wait too long to commit? And could the opposite pressure on men thought to view having a partner as a sign of status make a relationship harder for both sides? What do you think?
Yes, I'm going to say something really tough here, which is that although I know people who found each other on dating apps, the dating apps are dangerous. And what I mean is that they feed this illusion that somewhere out there is a perfect person, and if you had eternity, you could find that person. We don't have eternity to make those decisions and to find the people who we will spend our lives with. And so this illusion, again, this consumerism, this idea of shopping for people, swipe right and you'll finally find the one, I think is obviously destabilizing for romance. And so the only advice I have comes from knowing what the world was like before the internet, when one had no choice but to meet people in real life, in public places, in coffee shops, at dances, at parties, at dinners, in classrooms. I'm not glamorizing it. The dating life and courtship are always full of chance, of course, and riskiness and anxiety too. But what I'm saying is that there is no substitute for face-to-face encounters with real human beings. And during the pandemic, we lost some of that knowledge, and we need to get it back in full.
Do you know any communities, Catholic one, Christian one, where people might have this opportunity to meet?
Well, in the United States, although it's not a matchmaking service, but in the United States, in Washington, D.C., there's something called the Catholic Information Center, which brings in speakers and has programming for people in their 20s and 30s especially, to bring them together. And so these tend to be young professionals from different walks of life around the nation's capital. And once more, the intent is not to fix people up, but it's to bring together like-minded people in conversation or over shared interests. I am aware of programs like that in different parishes. To my knowledge, no one has been programmatic about this. No one is doing this as a regular feature, apart from a few parishes here and there. And I think it's really important especially for our clergy, to start thinking thematically and systematically about this, because the crisis of romance and marriage is a crisis for the church, obviously. And so therefore the church has to be part of the solution.
Some of my Catholic friends who are listening to this podcast might be shocked, but my Polish friends, some of them managed to find their spouses on Tinder, for example. Even we have some Polish Catholic influencer, Tomasz Samałek, who met his wife on this app, but I heard that in USA it looks quite different than Poland.
I have never used a dating app,
You don't need
but from what I am aware of, yes, Tinder is frowned upon, and other sites are used for people who want to find long-term partners, husbands and wives. But again, I'm telling you this third hand. And once more, I'm with you. I do know people who are happily married now who found one another online. I guess what I'm saying is that if you are using those dating apps, don't only use the dating apps.
Yes, exactly. So coming back to the topic of men, many of my female friends mentioned that they could not find a partner with a similar education. And since more women than men attend universities today, and men are falling behind in educational attainment in many places, do you see the gap creating problems for relationships and marriage like that?
Yes, I do think the gap creates problems, but it's not a permanent feature of existence. And what I mean by that is people need to adjust their expectations. So perhaps we're going to live in a world where women, on balance, have more education, but this is still a world in which men can do many manly things that are not just about what kind of degree they have, right? There is a kind of masculine genius in sports, for example, in working with one's hands, in being able to take care of a home, in being physically superior, for the most part, to the female sex. And these are all beautiful things that, again, we do not value enough. There is a particular masculine genius in being a husband and being a father. And I think when you put together all of those positives, they far outweigh the current issue that perhaps men are lagging women in education. What we need to do, again, is recognize all of those positives as masculine virtues and appreciate them.
So, could you offer men and women free advices when looking for the other half?
I'm always happy to offer free advice, Jan. I don't know how valuable it is, but I have been watching men and women for some decades, and my thoughts for young men are along the lines of what we've been discussing. Take the initiative. Don't think that just because the girl has a master's degree and you don't, that somehow puts you out of the competition. Be a guy, and don't spend all your time on the internet in circles where men complain about how women are. That's not going to get you anywhere. The only thing that will get you anywhere is using your masculine initiative that God gave you to stand up and be willing to compete and woo. And my advice for young women is similarly geared toward young women, to stop immersing yourselves in a crisis of confidence that is brought on by too much time on the internet, and understand that although there is such a thing as masculine initiative, maybe once in a while you would want to take the initiative too, and understand also that whether the society around you reinforces it or not, your fertility, your ability to have a family in the first place is the most extraordinary thing about human beings anywhere. And if nobody tells you that, you should know that it is eternally true nevertheless. So to both sides, more confidence, more risk-taking, and good luck.
And what about creating a family? How is a Catholic marriage supposed to decide on more than 3 children, for example, since most men are unable to provide for such a big family? Is the whole economic system a problem or something else? Because, for example, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, a man was able to provide for almost the whole family by himself. Now it's impossible.
So, a man providing for a family is an eternal challenge. This goes all the way back to Adam and Eve when they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and Adam is told that he will have to work. By the sweat of his brow, he will have to work. So, this is an eternal question for every man who finds himself with a family. And as to the matter of children, there is very good technological news on this front as well, which is that we have all kinds of ways of determining fertility now that didn't used to exist. And these devices or apps or whatever they may be are in wide use among young couples who are practicing natural family planning. And it's a kind of science that didn't exist before. And I think these couples find it a great help in their marriages. And that's a good thing. So there are reasons for hope that I think didn't even exist 5 years ago, Jan, when we survey this scene of social media, problems with romance, problems with finding one another. We are getting more fixes all the time, and that's something that everyone can be grateful for.
I had a pleasure to speak with Professor Mary Eberstadt. If you will be interested in the works of Professor, there can be found on website maryeberstadt.com. Thank you again, Professor, for this conversation.
Thank you, Jan. It's always a delight to talk with you.